Do you like nostalgia bait movies?
Well, then you're in luck with Scream 7. Let's talk about it. Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about Scream 7 and kind of giving some spoiler and non-spoiler discussions, starting with the non-spoilers. So we'll kind of talk about things and then do more of a deep dive towards the end. Before jumping in, if you're a Scream fan or just a horror fan in general, consider subbing to the channel because we'll talk way more about this in the future. I plan to do a live stream discussion later this week to kind of really deep dive even further and probably put out a short with updated franchise rankings at this point. So starting things off with some non-spoiler thoughts. Right off the bat, this movie was a bit of a roller coaster for me. There were times I thought it was really delivering, really hitting home, and others that it fell a little bit flat. So the general premise that we were pitched here is Sydney and her daughter Tatum are now being targeted by this new ghostface, and we were teased with the return of some presumed dead legacy characters like Stu and Roman and Dewey and all that kind of stuff. Thematically, the film felt like a coming-of-age story for Sydney's daughter, weirdly mixed with a Ghostface slasher storyline. As mentioned in my opening, there was a lot of homage to the older franchise entries, most notably with Scream 1, whether it was how the intro credits were done, shot-for-shot recreated moments from earlier films. It definitely went for the member berries here.
Hey, remember Ghostface? Ooh, I remember.
And while you could still watch this 7th installment without seeing the others, I think it heavily relies on having seen all of them to get the full experience. Like at least 5 separate times we have characters go, hey, remember New York from Scream 6? Remember that you weren't there, Sydney? When it comes to the whodunit aspect of these movies, that's kind of a big part of how successful it winds up being. But I would say for this movie, at about the halfway point, I did know who Ghostface was. Speaking of Ghostface, they also kind of did the obnoxious boot stomping thing, like the I Know What You Did Last Summer remake did last year. There's a lot of similarities you could probably make between that movie and this movie, but very much the theatrical experience relied upon the heavy stomping of the intimidating presence of Ghostface, searching out for wherever our characters are. I've seen some people mention that they thought acts 1 and 2 were pretty stellar and the movie fell off at act 3, but I didn't quite feel that way myself. It was kind of up and down throughout all 3 acts for me. I do probably agree with those folks though that the act 3 reveal was kind of weak. Granted, I think that happens pretty often in some of these Scream movies.
Everybody's a suspect!
The returning cast of characters that we know previously, all I thought did pretty great in their roles. Sydney in particular was a standout performance for me, but I also did really enjoy Mindy's character. But a lot of these newer characters, I didn't quite enjoy as much. Chloe was probably my favorite with this new crew. The setup and introduction for these new characters felt a little bit awkward though. When first seeing them, we would excessively say each other's names, as if we're kind of telling the audience who they are.
Now, let's play the fun game that helps us learn each other's names.
Pretty much it didn't feel overly organic to me as a whole. The mother-daughter dynamic of Sydney and Tatum, while maybe realistic at times, I wasn't a huge fan of it, and I kind of related to something like Dexter New Blood. Yes, kids have their angsty teen phases where they want to grow and form their own identity, but that tends to make me like this younger cast a little bit less. But that may just be me being an old curmudgeon at this point. The kill scenes, like the entire movie, were also hit or miss for me. Some were interesting and innovative ideas, but there's one in particular that I'll talk about a little bit later that was a little bit too cheesy for me and took me out of things a bit. Looking at some subscores for the movie here, for a plot score, I'll say 2 out of 5 here. The idea of returning to Sydney's character was a fun idea, but it relied on too many retreads, while also flopping on some of the aspects that made this entry unique. For an entertainment score, I'll say 3 out of 5. I'm kind of a sucker for whodunit films, but it wasn't exactly the most compelling version of that. For a gore score, I'll say 4 out of 5. The movie does provide some brutal and violent attacks that deliver for fans of them continuing to evolve their kills. For scare score, this is like a 3 out of 5. There are some tense scenes where Ghostface strikes, but to me, Ghostface can only be so scary as a threat. For rewatchability, this one's a 2 out of 5. I would rewatch it in the future, mainly with those that haven't seen it yet, but it's not one that I'll probably throw on often by myself. So for a final score here before jumping into some spoilers, this may change over time, but fresh off of seeing it, I'll say 5 out of 10. The takeaway here is that there was a lot of promise, and some of it was successful, and some of it was kind of meh. Alright, now jumping into some quick spoilers. First off, I guess, the trailer I think showed a little bit too much. I mean, we kind of recycled the same scenes in a lot of the trailers, but like the entire opening segment we kind of already saw in the trailer. The garage scene where Mark gets attacked, I feel like we'd seen in that trailer, and that kind of stuff I feel like was a little bit too much revealed previously. And speaking of that opening scene, I have no idea how that entire house filled up with flames so fast, but probably best not to think about it too much. Looking at the characters a little bit more in depth, mainly this new group of kids didn't feel like real people at times. Like Hannah gets brutally murdered at that theater, and no one really seems to care at all. I still don't really know how the killer wasn't caught on Sydney's home camera going into the attic. All they really say is that the killer was tech savvy. All right. And speaking of the killers, we get the first one about halfway through the movie, and it's some guy whose name we saw in a coffee cup earlier, which felt like an obvious but also kind of lame reveal.
Fill up!
The pizza delivery boy from when they ordered pizza at the beginning of the story. Come on, you guys.
I did like the change up in the formula of showing us a killer before the finale though, kind of like what Scream 6 did with their intro. Some other things to point out, it was kind of surprising there was a whole town curfew just for a couple murders. It felt like they made a major deal out of all this stuff, but then also the cops are really never seen again after Sydney and her family go home at that point, and then they're just like, hey, we're going to survey the neighborhood, it'll be fine. Then we pretty much never see the cops ever again. Towards the final act, we have Sydney just running in the street like she's RoboCop. Not really sure what her plan was there. She should have just gone back to Gail and gotten the keys to the car, but she's just like running somewhere, but doesn't really ever get there. During all of these attacks, it also felt kind of weird that Tatum never called her mom, her dad, or the police. Or like when we had that theater incident, why didn't Sydney call Tatum? She called her husband and then just kind of bolted to try to get there. With all that, there's just kind of some inconsistencies with logic that if you think a little bit too hard about it, you're like, I don't know about that. The one time that Sydney and Tatum do text each other, Sydney texts there's a gun in the office, but doesn't tell Tatum where it is or what the safe code is until later on. We also get some stereotypical horror moments too, like when she says shoot him in the head and then Tatum just waits too long. I guess maybe that was supposed to be showing her character growth later on in the movie where she finally does shoot someone in the head. At the end of the movie, we have Sydney just go to her house on her own, never calls the cops, never calls her husband, and is kind of surprised to see him at the end there. So I'm not really sure what her real plan was there or really what she was thinking, which somehow he survived being stabbed and left in the garage all day. But then you have another character like Chloe just gets smoked by these like bar glass cups and goes out really quickly. And speaking of the bar scene, the beer tap kill is the one I was referring to earlier that I did not personally like. It just felt a little bit too cheesy. I did like some of the other creative kills though, like the one at the beginning with Scott's character when he gets stabbed and kind of his eye turns as you see the knife going into his head. And when it comes to the end reveal, like I said earlier, the killers were a little bit too obvious. Right when Sydney went to that facility and we have this new character, Marco, say, oh yeah, I recognize Stu's face. He's this John Doe character. Right then I'm like, dude, you're definitely the killer. Like you recognize Matthew Lillard, Stu Macher face. Like he's not back. We're doing this whole fake out with like something like Jigsaw where, oh, maybe Stu's back, but he's not actually, but you recognize his face. You're definitely the bad guy. And since he was the bad guy, I don't know why he would even tell her that he recognizes the face. It feels like he's giving too much information, maybe just being a dumb character. I don't know. Let me know what you guys thought about that as well with the fake out with the AI stuff and not actually having these characters come back. It felt like Stu's role was fine. I think a lot of fans are probably gonna be bummed that they teased him coming back. I think originally when we got the announcement, I'm like, okay, he'll be real and these other characters won't be. But then the more I kind of thought about it, I'm like, no, they wouldn't give the killer away that easily. So he definitely had a prominent role with seeing him pretty frequently. I think that was fine, including all of these other characters at the end, kind of just hodgepodged in there. I don't think that was really worthwhile. Like you have Dewey's character, you have Mrs. Loomis's character, you have Roman, just kind of like real quick moments. They almost have like 20 seconds of screen time. It's like very brief, not really worth the big announcement and kind of hype they try to get around the movie. Maybe they're trying to kind of steer clear from the bad press and try to promote that stuff, but it felt like kind of a teased way to get people to watch the movie without really giving them ultimately what they wanted. When it comes to the third Ghostface killer with Jessica, she was a little bit more subtle, but she disappeared partly through the movie, and I always kind of expected that Anna Kemp would be the maniacal killer moment there at the end. Her motive was pretty weak, with Sydney being her motivation and wanting Sydney to never escape trauma. I know coming into the movie, I wondered like, hey, would you have her be the killer and not have her son get involved? But then when her son did die during that bar scene, I kind of actually surprisingly thought in the moment, it's like, I actually think that you are the killer. They're trying to do this obvious misdirect once that happened to be like, oh no, couldn't have been her. Her son died. But it's like, she's crazy enough. Actually, yeah, that was what happened. And similar to that beer tap kill, Jessica's kill was super over the top. It almost felt like a Boondock Saints moment where they just blast her after Tatum has her hero moment.
Spiritu Sancti.
Then we get this cringy line where Sydney asks Tatum, are you okay? And Tatum responds with, I'm Sydney effing Prescott's daughter, which they've always kind of done that over the top stuff towards the end. So I'll allow it here. Another bit over the top scene is when Gail and Chad and Mindy show up and Gail just runs over the first Ghostface killer. I'm like, okay, that's a bit too cheesy for me. We do have Sydney wind up making up with Gail by the end of things here. She says, I should have been in New York, which almost felt like Nev was maybe saying that as an actor, that she should have been in Scream 6 maybe. I will say that the mid-credit scene was pretty great. Mindy having these mess ups as a reporter felt very relatable as somebody who makes videos. There's probably a ton more I could say. I don't mean to really be bashing it as much. I feel like in the spoilers, I probably laid out a lot of things that I had issues with, but there's definitely some positives I had throughout the film, obviously with the 5 out of 10 scoring. But as I said earlier, we'll do a real deep dive live stream later this week. So make sure to check that out and join in, kind of give your thoughts. We'll kind of talk about pretty much every scene, all of the characters, our thoughts maybe going forward. Are they planning to do a Scream 8 and beyond? We'll have to see there. Is there going to be a passing of the torch? Not really sure, but we'll just do a full deep dive of things there and bring your own thoughts, as I mentioned, maybe some ideas of how you would have done the film differently. For example, I'm a little bit biased here, but I love Jimmy Tatro as an actor. I think it could have been better with Scott's character from the beginning, that guy that was the opening kill. Something like he gets a taste of being at Stu's house maybe, and it makes him want to do more, so he gets kind of fully consumed by being Ghostface. Something like that I think could have worked better as a motive, but the motives for these movies are all a little bit kind of weak. You have some of these deranged killers, so maybe it makes sense that their motives are weak because they're a little bit off their rocker. Definitely a lot of directions they could have taken things. We'll talk about it all during that live stream. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.